any extra will help, you know? And so that was really unfortunate. I had no idea that that type of thing was happening, but it's common knowledge, I think, for some in the environmental community at least, that communities of color or people of color are more likely to live near coal plants, kind of like how, you know, communities of color are more likely to live near trash dumps and things of that nature, to be in places where polluters pollute, because they may have the least likely to, you know, speak out against it or demand something better. And so what that means is a disproportionate health impact. If you have more people of color living near coal plants, you have more disproportionate impact of like asthma. We know that there's a connection between asthma and living near coal plants. And there's an EPA tool that I looked at recently that has the schools. It looks at schools, and it looks at schools that are in places with the worst air quality. And so I looked at like the top 4th percentile of the worst air quality schools that have the worst air quality. And Virginia has quite a few schools in the top 4th percentile of worst air quality. And that's connected to, in some ways, to, you know, those schools being near coal plants. And so, and that's one of the things that we want our legislators to understand. I met with Senator Kane's office. I'm a part of the environmental justice work group of the Clean Power Plant Coalition. I coordinate that work group. And we met with Senator Kane's office. We met with Senator Warner's office. And we talked to them about, you know, their need for increased leadership because of exactly that. It's not just about reducing emissions. It is about that, but it's about the people who are impacted, and we need you to speak about that. We need you to be a leader on that people are impacted, and it's the people that you represent, and to not only react, but to lead, you know, to set a standard of leading as it relates to addressing, you know, climate change. And we couldn't even say that. When I first started with New Virginia Majority in 2013, it was a dirty word. I was taught that don't even mention climate change unless you really, really have to, you know? And so now just being able to say that with a new governor and kind of like a change in season in some ways is great, but, you know, I don't want to unnecessarily bash anybody, but I would definitely like our legislators to play a more active role as it relates to connecting the human deficit that we are, you know, experiencing from being not as good leaders as we need to on addressing this issue.
Question? Yeah, go ahead.
I think you all three of you, referred to this as you're talking. Everyone in this room has a vote, so we have a lot of power in this room. I firmly believe that, and all throughout the Democratic Party. Over the next year and a half, as we know, our governor is going to probably, more than likely, support Hillary Clinton. And in order for Hillary to win, she's going to need every single Democrat in this state. And I think it's time we start using our clout. And we start saying that we're the Democratic Party. We are supposed to be the protectors of the environment. If we are not, then who is?
Green Party.
I say we put a lot of pressure. We use our political leverage, which every one of us has, because we each have a vote. If he wants us to support, if he wants the Democratic Party of Virginia to support Hillary Clinton, and a lot of us don't, well, anyway, some of us feel a little differently, some of us don't, then he's got to give us something. It wasn't business that elected him. He may think so, but it wasn't. It was everybody in this room, and it was all the activists that put Terry McAuliffe where he is, put his lieutenant governor there, his attorney general there. It was not Dominion power. And I think we need to remind you of that.
Let me just say something about that, because, you know, the tradition of the environmental community, tradition of the environmental issue has always been that it's been nonpartisan. For almost the entire history of the environmental movement, it was nonpartisan or bipartisan. From Teddy Roosevelt to even Richard Nixon. And he wasn't a great environmentalist, but under his administration, there was the Endangered Species Act, there was the Clean Water Act, there was the National Environmental Policy Act, there was the Endangered Species Act. All that happened at a time when we did not have the polarization that we have today, and we didn't have, well, we had, I'm from Maryland, and Mac Mathias was a Republican senator who was one of the champions of the Chesapeake Bay. We just don't see that anymore, and there's a lot of reasons for it, but as I mentioned a little bit earlier, even Republicans, a majority of Republicans, believe that the environment is important, that climate change is real, but unfortunately, their party's been hijacked by a minority that denies climate change, and they're the ones who show up at primaries and vote. I think we need to recognize that while we need to insist on Democratic leadership in this area, we also need to encourage our Republican friends to get behind candidates that are going to face up to these issues, like Delegate Nolan Wave in Virginia Beach, for example, who has actually put this bill in the Virginia Climate Protection Act, or Coastal Protection Act, which it deals with flood issues. So just want to strike that bipartisan balance, recognizing at the same time that, if you're a Democrat, you need to push the Democrats to care about climate change. If you're a Republican, you need to push Republicans. It's just something we ought to do. Yeah, back there, sure.
As you were talking about the bipartisan approach, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it Carter that put solar panels on the White House and Reagan took them off?
Yeah.
It became really political and non-bipartisan after that.
And I think it was Obama who put them back. It took a long time to get them back.
Reagan disassembled the entire alternative energy funding.
Right. The United States was a leader in the technology with regard to wind and solar back when Ronald Reagan basically dismantled that industry, unfortunately. Yeah, go ahead, man.
So we seem to have this relationship here between the governor and Dominion. So what is that? What is that? Why does the governor? Why is he pals with Dominion? What's that all about?
I'll give you one perspective, because I was in a meeting where some of them was a staff, okay, and that is the governor, and I think rightly so, sees a critical need to diversify the economy of Virginia. Heavily dependent on the defense industry because of sequester, the numbers are going down. And so, and also we're coming out of a recession, and as a result of that, the job market has been kind of soft. So he really is trying to jumpstart the economy. Dominion Virginia Power travels with him on some of these economic development trips and can offer a large manufacturer a very, very low electricity rate. Talk about subsidies, right? We're paying around 10 cents a kilowatt, which is pretty cheap. But if you're an industrial customer in Dominion, you're paying 6 or 8 cents per kilowatt. Okay, they give them a discount. And so I think one of the reasons the governor has been listening to Dominion a lot is because as he tries to attract some of these industries in the state, he can have Tom Farrell come in and offer a very attractive low electricity rate. That's part of the problem.
Just to speak to that briefly, I think there's as someone who really does believe in job creation, bringing jobs into the state is great, but Virginia has such an educated and entrepreneurial citizenry. Why not invest money into them to start businesses, is what I would say, instead of trying to bring it in from other states. The future of Virginia could be this renewable energy future. We could be leading the country, and people say, oh, the sun doesn't shine, all these sorts of things, but the battery technology is getting better. In Ohio, it's viable. We get a lot more sun than Ohio, so we'll be doing fine in this sort of way, but the governor should be investing in the entrepreneurial spirit of the citizens that are here. And that's why I think civic leadership is so key.
I think there's a key element too that is obvious, and that is I read an article in the Richmond Times-Dispatch that Dominion gave money to every single legislator, everyone, and the amount of money depended on the strength of the influence of the legislator. And the money that they gave the governor, I can't really remember the figure, but $53,000 or $73,000 is sort of sticking in my mind. So I really think that's one way we can change the equation, is to have a legislative campaign to get legislators to give back that money.
This is something that Juan talked about, and this is the whole democracy issue here, whether it's redistricting or whether it's campaign finance reform or whether it's voter rights. All those are under attack in this country. And if we take our democracy back, and I mean our small d democracy back, like redistricting, when the Democrats had control, they redistricted to protect their incumbents. When the Republicans had control, they did the same. If we just drew fair lines, I think we would win on most of our issues, okay? We don't need to protect the incumbents of either party. Let's draw those lines fair, and we can win on these issues. Quan, you might want to talk about some of the democracy issues.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that New Virginia Majority supports is a bipartisan redistricting commission. There was legislation for that. Some of you are not, and y'all are aware of it. It did not pass, but something that we are supporting again, and because it's really key, not just for the environmental work, for all of our work. What we have is legislators choosing their constituents. Constituents should choose their legislators, and so we need to definitely support any legislation that comes out about a bipartisan redistricting commission or something along the lines of a fair, fair party lines being drawn or whatever. I think I want to speak to a little bit about what we're up against when we deal with partisan. This environmental issue really, I have seen few things kind of polarize General Assembly. I don't have a lot of experience with the General Assembly either, so that's not really saying much. But, a lot of times people just vote straight. It's a party line vote. The Virginia Coastal Protection Act was basically, even though Delegate Villanueva was a patron for it, was basically kind of like a party line vote, where they just decide ahead of time, like we as a group, I'm not going to speak for myself as a legislator and not have a responsibility to lead, but just my group, I'm going to act like a gang and my group says no. That type of thing, it happens, and it's very disheartening, especially when you look at people and why people don't want to vote in the first place, because you have a lot of immaturity happening in the General Assembly. Another thing is with how partisan this issue is that what I've learned in just having meetings with Senator Warner's office and trying to just talk to some of the Southwest Virginian legislators is that Southwest Virginia is really proud of coal country. So when we talk about, dealing with the fact that you're going to have to recreate your economy, there's a lot of denial and resistance to that, because what I'm learning is it's wrapped up in people's identity. One of the people that we talked to said that, my father was a coal miner, my brother is a coal miner, my son is going to be a coal miner, and so is his son. I mean, it's that deep as far as the identity of people. When you challenge the identity of people, regardless of what logic says, this is their identity. So we're up against something more than just logic and rationale and health. It's deeper than that. And so I don't know exactly how to speak to that other than to speak to that. Engage people there, go there sometimes, have forums there, and really talk about people vote against their self-interest all the time because they're convinced that it benefits them somehow when it doesn't, So that's all a part of the partisan conversation, and unfortunately some people don't care about their constituents, and they'll have them vote against their own self-interest. I think those of us in this room would say, hey, actually don't do that. That may not be a good move for you because it's not a good move for you. But, some people say, hey, do it anyway because it benefits me. And that's what's happening a lot in Southwest Virginia, unfortunately.
Just to answer that on conservative opposition, one of the things I got to do is work with a lot of conservative offices. And the opposition changes. I would suspect, just dealing with some of the delegates and the state senators here, some of it's lack of knowledge of the issue. They don't really know how everything works because they have a lot to cover, especially if they're not on committee and they're part-time. But at the national level, where they do know, a lot of it gets clouded by, well, I had a bad experience with the EPA. I had a bad experience with one of the agencies in jurisdiction. And when that happens, if the member has a bad experience trying to fight an issue, New Hampshire is a great example. EPA was coming in and they were doing a water quality test on a fairly progressive town, and if it had failed, they would have had to spend a lot of money to build a better treatment plant, essentially. And so I'm listening to this, I'm not saying anything, and the members essentially saying, well, what was so frustrating is I was calling the EP office, they wouldn't call me back. I finally had to get the state to retest it because I didn't think that was correct. before we were vindicated. I'm not saying this excuses everyone's behavior. It certainly doesn't. It doesn't excuse some of the